What if I told you that behind the perfectly curated squares of social media, behind the smiling family photos and the heartwarming updates, there was a document? A single piece of paper, not a dramatic courtroom decree, but a formal, legal letter that ripped the facade right off. This is the story they never wanted you to piece together. This is about the dividing line between a public persona and a private struggle. This is about Tori Roloff's Get Out order. We've all followed the journey. The little people, big world. The marriages, the babies, the milestones shared with millions. It's a modern-day fairy tale, or so it seemed. We watched Zach and Tori build their life, face challenges with their son Jackson's health, and ultimately make the monumental decision to leave the family farm. It was framed as a new beginning, a quest for independence and privacy. But what if the truth was more urgent, more raw, than a simple quest for space? What if that move wasn't just a choice, but a necessity triggered by a legal ultimatum? The phrase "get out order" conjures images of immediate danger, of courtrooms and restraining orders. But the reality is often more nuanced and, in some ways, more chilling. This wasn't necessarily a standard emergency protective order filed with a court. Our investigation suggests it was something that exists in the shadowy realm between family drama and legal precedent, a formal cease and desist, a notice to vacate, or a powerfully worded legal directive from one party to another. It's the kind of document that doesn't just suggest a separation, it mandates it. It draws a line in the sand and says, cross this, and the full weight of the law follows. To understand how such a letter could become necessary, we have to rewind. We have to look at the landscape of the Roloff family dynamic, not as fans, but as observers of human behavior under the pressure of fame, business, and legacy. Matt Roloff, the patriarch, is a visionary. He built Roloff Farms from the ground up, not just as a home, but as an empire, a brand, and the central set piece for a television show that has run for over 2 decades. That kind of creation isn't just property, it's an identity. And when you mix identity with family, the lines of ownership, both physical and emotional, become dangerously blurred. For years, the narrative was one of succession. Which son would take over the farm? Jeremy, the firstborn? Zach, the more featured son? The farm became the ultimate prize, the symbol of legacy and approval. Jeremy and Audrey made their choice, stepping back, focusing on their own ventures. That left Zach. And for a long time, it seemed destined. We saw the discussions, the negotiations, the dreaming. Zach and Tori envisioned their future there, their children growing up in the same iconic spaces their father had built. It was the perfect story arc for the show, the son taking the mantle. But then, the stall. The negotiations went cold. Reports, later confirmed in snippets on the show and social media, cited a fundamental disagreement on price. Matt had a valuation for the property, a piece of land steeped in reality TV history and commercial potential. Zach and Tori had the budget of a young family, one whose primary income was intertwined with the very show the farm hosted. Here lies the first critical fracture. What is the price of a family home? Is it market value? Or is it a family value? This disconnect wasn't just about real estate, it was about perceived value, respect, and perhaps even love. Matt saw a business asset. Zach saw his birthright. The tension simmered in public view, though carefully edited. The palpable awkwardness in family gatherings, the forced smiles, the interviews where Zach would talk about being hurt and Tori's eyes would tell a story her words couldn't. They began to physically distance themselves, spending more time at their house in Battle Ground, Washington. Then came the official announcement. They were leaving. They bought a new property, a farmhouse of their own. The narrative presented was one of positive growth, our own journey, a fresh start for our kids, putting our family first. But sources close to the family, speaking under condition of anonymity, suggest the timeline was tighter, the emotions far more volatile than what was broadcast. The business negotiation had soured into a personal rift. Communication broke down. Normal family spats became landmines. And in the background, a new element entered the chat. Karen Chandler, Matt's longtime girlfriend and now fiancé. From Zach and Tori's perspective, as hinted in various episodes, Karen's influence over Matt, particularly in business matters concerning the farm, was a point of deep contention. The dynamic shifted from a father-son disagreement to a more complex and perhaps more hurtful us versus them scenario. This is where the environment becomes ripe for a legal letter. Imagine the scenario: strained communications, unresolved property disputes, the high emotions of family feeling sidelined, and the constant, unavoidable pressure of cameras documenting the slow-motion fracture. What might have been a heated argument in a normal family now carried the risk of being recorded, misinterpreted, or leveraged. Boundaries, already fragile, began to shatter. According to our sources, the triggering incident may have revolved around the farm itself, access to it, use of it, or actions taken on it. Perhaps it was an unannounced visit that felt like a violation. Perhaps it was a discussion about removing personal belongings that escalated. Perhaps it was something said in the heat of the moment that crossed a line from frustration into something perceived as threatening or dangerously accusatory. In families not on television, these moments might lead to a cooling-off period. In this family, with so much at stake, personally, financially, and professionally, it may have led to a lawyer's desk. The drafting of such a letter is a calculated act. It is the nuclear option of personal relationships. It means all informal channels are considered closed. It means communication must now flow through legal representatives. It formalizes the conflict. The contents of such a directive to Zach and Tori would have been unequivocal. It likely outlined specific prohibited actions. Do not come to the farm without express, written permission. Do not contact the following persons directly. Cease and desist from making any public statements that could be construed as defamatory regarding the following matters. It may have even set a formal deadline for the removal of any remaining possessions from the property. The psychological impact of receiving such a document cannot be overstated. This isn't a text from Dad saying, "We need some space." This is a formal, legalese-laden document that reduces a lifelong relationship to a list of prohibitions and consequences. For Tori, this would have been the ultimate confirmation of her worst fears, that she and Zach were not just disagreeing with family, but were now being legally defined as potential adversaries. Her get-out order wasn't just about a property, it was an expulsion from the very idea of family as they knew it. It changed everything because it made the rupture permanent, official, and cold. The dream of a peaceful resolution, of Christmases at the farm, of Grandpa Matt giving tractor rides to his grandkids on the very land he loved, that dream was now mediated by attorneys. This letter, whether it sits in a file cabinet or a digital folder, marks the point of no return. It explains the finality of their move. It wasn't just that they bought a new house, it was that the old home was legally placed off limits. It explains the stark change in tone on social media. The posts about their new farmhouse weren't just excited, they were declarations of independence, of a fortress built against the past. Every painted wall, every planted tree, was a statement: "We are building what you would not let us have." But the story doesn't end with the mailing of a letter. That was just the end of the beginning. The aftermath is where the real documentary unfolds. Because this legal action exists in the silent spaces between what is shown on television. Watch the seasons that follow with this context. Notice the absence. The family gatherings that Zach, Tori, and the kids are conspicuously missing from. The episodes filmed at Roloff farms where their presence is a ghost, mentioned in passing if at all. The careful language used by both sides. Matt speaking about business decisions and moving forward. Zach and Tori speaking about protecting our peace and our little family. The show must go on, but the family cannot. The legal letter ensured that. It created two separate universes. In one universe, Matt and Karen plan their wedding, renovate parts of the farm, and run their business. In the other, Zach and Tori build a pumpkin patch to rival the one from their past, create their own traditions, and fiercely guard their privacy. The connection is now parallel, not intersecting. The letter severed the tangle of threads, leaving two clean, separate, and lonely ends. And what of the grandchildren? This is perhaps the most profound consequence. Jackson, Lila, and Josiah are now growing up with their grandfather's legacy as a television set they sometimes visit, not a backyard they roam. The letter didn't just separate father and son, it engineered a new geography of kinship. Visits are now scheduled, supervised events, not spontaneous drop-ins. The casual intimacy of family is lost, replaced by the formality of arrangement. The legal framework dictates the emotional reality. This raises the inevitable question: was this legal step an overreaction, a necessary boundary, or a strategic power play? Perspectives will forever be divided. From Matt's side, one could argue he had a right to protect his property, his peace, and his relationship from what he may have perceived as ongoing toxicity or intrusion. After a lifetime in the public eye, perhaps drawing this hard, legal line was the only way he felt he could reclaim control. From Zach and Tori's side, it was the ultimate rejection, a weaponization of law against flesh and blood, proving that the farm as a business would always trump family. The get-out order is the skeleton key to understanding the current state of the Roloff dynasty. It explains why certain topics are forever off limits on the show. It explains the palpable ice that no amount of editing can thaw. It explains why Tori's smile sometimes doesn't reach her eyes when she talks about new beginnings, because every beginning is also an end. But here's where the story continues, where the next chapter is being written in real time. Because legal letters have expiration dates only on their specific demands, the emotional fallout is perpetual. The farm will one day pass on. Matt will not live forever. What happens then? Does the legal stance soften with time and grandchildren? Does the bitterness solidify into a permanent estrangement? Or does the sheer weight of history, of shared blood and shared camera lenses, eventually force a détente? The legacy of this document is a family forever altered. It's a cautionary tale about what happens when family business isn't just a saying, but a multi-million-dollar enterprise with contracts, valuations, and legal counsel. The Roloffs are living the endpoint of the American reality TV dream. They sold their story for prosperity, and in the process, they may have lost the very script that held them together. The cameras continue to roll, capturing the aftermath, but the true climax, the signing, the sending, the receiving of that fateful letter happened off-screen, in the quiet, real world where no confessionals are filmed. And as we watch them navigate this new normal, we are left to wonder, can a relationship survive once it has been notarized? Can you ever go home again when home has served you with papers? The journey continues, but the map has been permanently redrawn by a few lines of legal text. The story of Tori Roloff's get-out order is a reminder that the most powerful stories aren't always told in episodes. Sometimes they're contained in the silence between them, in the unspoken words that echo louder than any televised argument, and in the cold, formal prose of a letter that changed everything and continues to shape every single day that follows. The divide is now a fact, not a feeling. And in that space between what was and what is, an entire family is learning to live with the consequences, one carefully managed, legally conscious day at a time. The future of the Roloffs is no longer a simple family tree. It's a case study in the price of fame, the weight of land, and the enduring, complicated ache of kinship severed not by chance, but by choice. A choice made permanent by the stroke of a pen on a document that simply said, in effect, go. And so they went. And the world watches, waiting to see if the story that was once about little people in a big world can ever again be about simply family. But that is a story for another season, another set of negotiations, another potential letter yet to be written. The saga is far from over. In fact, you could say, the letter arrived. Not with a knock at the door or a dramatic scene under the farm's iconic white gate, but likely through the sterile, impersonal channel of certified mail or a lawyer's email. It landed in their life not as a request, but as a mandate. And in that moment, for Zach and Tori Roloff, the past was officially redefined. Every childhood memory, every filmed pumpkin harvest, every moment of laughter and struggle on that soil was now filtered through a new, harsh lens. It had all led to this. A legal document that made them outsiders in their own story. But this isn't just a story about receiving a letter. This is about what happens in the seismic aftershock. This is about the quiet, desperate scramble to build a new reality before the old one fully collapses on top of you. The immediate aftermath of such a directive is a kind of emotional triage. The first order of business isn't grief, it's logistics. It's compliance. Think about the practicalities. If the letter demanded the removal of personal property from Roloff farms, it triggered a covert operation. No more leisurely weekends sorting through childhood keepsakes in the barn. This was a mission likely scheduled for a time when the coast was clear, when emotions and cameras could be avoided. Imagine the surreal nature of that task. Loading boxes of Zach's old toys, Tori's family photos that had been stored there, their children's first Halloween costumes from pumpkin season past, into a car while knowing you are there on borrowed time, under a legal cloud. Each item packed isn't just a memory, it's evidence of a life being physically uprooted. The farmhouse, the big house, was no longer a place of sentimental storage. It was now a premises from which you must collect your belongings by a certain date. The romance of the farm was dead, replaced by the cold checklist of an exit strategy. Simultaneously, there's the fortress building. Their own property in Battleground was no longer just a house, it was a command center and a sanctuary. Security, both physical and digital, likely became a priority. Changing routines, being vigilant about schedules, perhaps even consulting with legal counsel about their own rights to privacy and protection. When a family relationship enters the legal arena, paranoia isn't a disorder, it's a precaution. Every social media post, every story shared on the show, every casual comment made to a friend now had to be vetted by a new question. Could this be used against us? The joy of sharing their children's milestones was now tinged with the calculation of exposure. Their home became their compound, their safe zone, legally defined and defensible. And then, the children. How do you explain this to Jackson, Lila, and Josiah? You don't talk about legal letters or cease and desist orders. You create a new narrative. We're making our own farm now. This is our adventure. The energy is poured into the new pumpkin patch, into painting their own barn red, into creating new traditions so vivid and consuming that they might just overshadow the old ones. But children are perceptive. They feel absences. They notice the sudden stop of casual visits to Grandpa's big farm, the absence of certain names in conversation. The parent's job becomes one of active translation, turning a legal and emotional crisis into a child-friendly story of positive change. It's an exhausting, daily act of emotional labor. Meanwhile, on the other side of the boundary line, life also had to recalibrate. For Matt Roloff and Karen Chandler, sending or authorizing such a letter was not a decision made lightly, regardless of public perception. It would have been a last resort, advised by counsel, framed as a necessary step to establish peace and clear boundaries. But sending it doesn't grant immediate peace, it simply changes the nature of the conflict. Now, the conflict is silent, and silence can be louder than shouting. There would have been a strange, hollow victory. The perceived source of the friction was now legally mandated to keep its distance. The farm was quiet. The business could operate without interpersonal drama intruding. But at what cost? The grandchildren were absent. The son was gone. The public narrative, which they still partly relied on for their livelihood, was now fractured beyond easy repair. Every interview Matt gave now had to be meticulously crafted. He could no longer speak freely about family business because the family was now a legal matter. He began to speak in the abstract, about business decisions, about different visions, about moving forward. These are the code words of managed estrangement. Karen, often positioned by the audience as the catalyst, now lived on a property that was the subject of such intense legal and emotional fallout. Her dream home was also a fortress under siege by public opinion. The dynamic created a siege mentality on both sides of the battleground border. This is where the reality TV machine faces its most profound contradiction. The show Little People, Big World is built on the premise of documenting a family's real life. But what happens when the most real part of that life, a devastating legal family breakdown, is the one thing that cannot be fully shown? The result is a surreal narrative dissonance. We, the audience, are asked to follow two separate storylines that deliberately ignore the elephant in the room. We watch Zach and Tori build a chicken coop, and we are meant to invest in the whimsy, not question the profound grief that might be fueling this desperate embrace of homesteading. We watch Matt give a tour of the farm's new wedding venue, and we are not supposed to wonder if the guest list for his own wedding is being shaped by the same legal advice that drafted the Get Out order. The production company, the editors, they are now architects of an illusion. Their job is to create two parallel, watchable shows that occasionally acknowledge a difficulty, but never the foundational legal rupture. It leads to awkward cuts, to conversations that feel unnaturally truncated, to a pervasive sense that we are only seeing the weather report while a hurricane rages just off screen. This meta layer is critical to understanding the ongoing saga. The family is not just living with the letter, they are performing a version of their life that pretends the letter only sort of exists. It's a high-wire act without a net. Financially, the stakes were recalibrated overnight. For Zach and Tori, their income streams were intrinsically linked to the show, and the show was linked to the family. To stay on the program, they now had to film segments that were wholly separate, creating their own content engine. Their brand had to become self-sustaining, their social media, their podcast, their book ventures. The little family wasn't just an emotional unit, it was a startup company that had to generate its own revenue, independent of the Roloff Farms ecosystem. The pressure to monetize their private life, their new farm, their children's moments, their opinions intensified. Their independence was both a moral victory and a financial necessity. For Matt, the farm's value as a TV set was now compromised. A core element of the show's dynamic, the multi-generational interaction, was gone. The farm had to pivot from a family home to a pure business venue, weddings, pumpkin season, tourism. The show's narrative had to follow suit, highlighting Matt and Karen's business ventures and personal life more heavily. The financial success of the farm now relied less on TLC paycheck drips and more on its ability to stand alone as an attraction. The letter, in a brutal twist of irony, may have forced both parties to prove they could survive without the very familial entanglement that made them famous in the first place. Years pass in this state of suspended animation. The legal letter is not a one-time event, it's a state of being. It's the reason why a Roloff family wedding becomes a geopolitical event of guest list management. Who is invited? Who will attend if the other is there? Will there be separate filming schedules? The logistics are handled not by a mother with a seating chart, but by producers and, possibly legal intermediaries, ensuring the terms of that original boundary are not violated. A celebration becomes an exercise in high-stakes diplomacy. Holidays are permanently cleaved. There is no more one big table. There are two tables in two different counties, with two different sets of traditions being forged. The children have two separate sets of memories being created, Christmas at Mom and Dad's farmhouse and Christmas at Grandpa Matt and Grandma Karen's farm. The narrative splits, and with each passing year, the paths diverge further. The shared history becomes a distant country they can all remember, but can no longer visit together. Public appearances and social media become a carefully curated battlefield of subtext. When Tori posts a photo of her family with the caption, "My whole world," it's a loving statement. It's also a declaration of sufficiency. When Matt posts a picture of the farm at sunset, captioned, "Blessed to be the steward of this beautiful land," it's an appreciation. It's also a reinforcement of ownership and sole responsibility. The audience reads between the lines, creating a chorus of interpretation that the family members themselves are acutely aware of. They are speaking to their fans, but also past each other, using the public square to send uncoded messages of resilience, success, and contentment. And through it all, the children grow. Jackson is now of an age where he can understand more. He has his own memories of the big farm. He uses social media. He sees the comments. He lives in the echo chamber of this famous feud. His medical journey, a story of incredible strength, is now also part of this bifurcated family legacy. His grandparents are figures he sees on TV and visits under arranged circumstances. The natural, organic grandparent-grandchild relationship is another casualty of the legal divide. For Lila and Josiah, their reality is different. Their primary association with Roloff Farms is as a place they see on screens or visit occasionally, not as a second home. This generational shift is perhaps the most permanent consequence. The letter didn't just divide the present, it engineered two different futures. So, where does the story go from here? The document is filed. The boundaries are set. But human emotion is not a legal entity. It doesn't adhere to stipulations. The unresolved hurt, the love that existed before the business, the shared trauma of public life, these things don't have an expiration date. They simmer. The next chapter may be triggered by a crisis. An illness. A birth. A profound loss. Events that, in healthy families, pull people together. In this scenario, they present a profound dilemma. Does the legal boundary hold in the face of mortality or new life? Does someone reach out? And if they do, through what channel? A lawyer? A producer? A carefully worded text message after years of silence? The mechanisms for normal reconciliation have been dismantled. Any reconnection would now be a formal process, likely as carefully negotiated as the original separation. Or the trigger may be financial. The eventual settling of Matt's estate. The future of Roloff Farms when Matt is no longer there to steward it. The letter may have addressed immediate access, but it didn't and couldn't extinguish Zach's potential inheritance or legal interest as a son. That looming reality is a ticking clock on the current stalemate. The same issues of valuation, legacy, and control that sparked the initial rift will one day resurface, but next time, Zach and Tori won't be hopeful buyers. They may be heirs with legal rights,